My name is Eliza Hayes, and at 35 years old, I am the founder of an AI analytics firm worth $4.5 billion. But to my family, I was just a failure. It was 11:51 p.m. on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when my phone lit up. A text from my father. Arthur, after the board meeting, we've agreed. Your lifestyle is a liability. You are no longer a beneficiary of the Hayes family trust. Seconds later, a heart reaction appeared. Not from my mother, from my brother, Ryan. If you have ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, let me know in the comments. And please let me know where you're listening from, as I tell you how it all came to this. I didn't cry. I didn't text back why. I just stared at the two messages on my screen. The betrayal was so cold, so efficient. It was almost impressive. My father, Arthur Hayes, the CEO of Hayes & Sons Publishing, and my brother Ryan, the VP, had just disowned me from a trust worth, at most, maybe $4 million. They had no idea what they had just done. I opened my laptop. The glow from the screen felt clinical in the dark. For 5 years, my company, Quantum Read, had been the silent, anonymous benefactor for my father's prestige literary projects. You know the kind, the ones that win awards, get glowing reviews in niche magazines, and lose a fortune. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. At 11:58 p.m., I logged into the private wealth portal and terminated the quarterly transfer of $500,000, the one that kept their lights on. At 12:01 a.m., I sent a digitally signed order to my bank, freezing the corporate credit line I had personally guaranteed for them 8 months prior. At 12:03 a.m., I messaged my assistant cancel my flight to Boston for Thanksgiving indefinitely and clear my schedule for a call with legal. To understand why this wasn't cruel, you have to understand my family. Hayes & Sons Publishing was a Boston institution, a legacy built on paper, ink, and the smell of old leather. My father, Arthur, and my brothers, Ryan and Mark, lived in a world of leather-bound books and literary galas. They were the men of letters. My world AI-driven data analytics, predictive algorithms, and global market trends was, in my father's words, a silly website business, a distraction. I was the black sheep. The core wound happened when I was 22. Just out of college, I had the framework for what would become Quantum Read, an algorithm that could predict literary trends with 94% accuracy. I begged my father for a $20,000 seed loan. We were in his study, the room in the Beacon Hill brownstone that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. He didn't even look up from his desk. Eliza, he'd said, his voice full of disappointment. Data is not literature. Stop this hobby and come work in acquisitions at the press. I'm sure I can find a place for you. I left Boston the next week. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in my tiny office in a Palo Alto incubator. I built Quantum Read from nothing, scraping together code and investments until we finally broke through. And now, that hobby was an unseen giant. That silly website business had just been valued at $4.5 billion. And for the last 5 years, I had been secretly funneling $2 million a year just to keep my father's precious legacy from foreclosure. Why, I'd ask myself that all the time. I suppose I did it. After all this time, still hoping that one day he'd finally see me, that he'd finally say, "You did it." But you have to understand, for my father, legacy wasn't about success, it was about tangible proof. It was about physical books on a shelf. It was about the Hayes & Sons name carved into the stone of a building. Me digital, data-driven world was abstract. He couldn't hold it in his hands, so he couldn't value it. In his mind, my success wasn't just confusing. It was an insult to his entire identity. And I'd just let him insult me for the last time. The calls started exactly 8 a.m. I was already on my second cup of coffee, watching the fog burn off over the Golden Gate Bridge. I let it ring. It was Ryan. He didn't leave a voicemail. He just called again. And again. And again. On the fifth try, I picked up and put it on speaker, setting the phone down on my desk. I didn't say anything. Eliza? Eliza? His voice was high-pitched, laced with a panic I'd never heard before. What did you do? The payroll account is empty. The wire didn't come. What did you do? I just listened. I could hear him pacing, his breathing shallow. This isn't funny. Eliza, you're overreacting, whatever point you're trying to make. You've made it. Turn the money back on. Now. I sipped my coffee. Overreacting. That was the word he chose. Did you hear me? He shouted. You are screwing all of us. You turn it back on. Or, I'm telling Dad. I pressed the red end call button on my screen. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family. Now, I realized it had been a subscription, and I'd just canceled it. 10 minutes later, my father, Arthur, of course. A didn't call. A call would imply a conversation, a negotiation. My father didn't negotiate. He decreed. A booming voicemail notification appeared. I played it. Eliza. His voice was the one he used for board meetings. The one that made grown men shrink. This is petulant and childish. You have created a catastrophic mess. I don't know what point you're trying to prove. But you will reinstate the funds immediately. You will call this office. And then you will call your brother and apologize. This ends now. A catastrophic mess. He wasn't wrong. But he was confused about whose mess it was. Finally, just as I was about to head into my first meeting, a text from my mother. Susan. Eliza. Please call your father. You know how he gets? You're making things very difficult for everyone. Please. Just fix this so we can have a nice Thanksgiving. Your brother Mark is so looking forward to seeing you. I stared at the 3 messages. Ryan's panic. Arthur's rage. Susan's guilt. I realized something with a terrifying, cold clarity. Not a single why. Not one, are you okay? Not one person had asked what they had done. They weren't shocked by what they'd done. They were just shocked that I'd finally stopped playing along. The fog of my childhood obligation. The thick, heavy guilt I'd lived in for decades. It didn't just clear. It evaporated. It was gone. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. And for the first time, it was balanced. My family thought this was just drama. They thought I was a daughter throwing a tantrum. They forgot I was a CEO. I called my chief financial officer and my chief legal counsel to a video conference at 9 a.m. I need a full forensic audit of every financial interaction between my personal accounts, Quantum Read, and Hayes and Sons Publishing, going back 10 years. My CFO, a man who lives for numbers, just nodded. Melavier, however, looked confused. Eliza. Why, it's your family. I looked into the camera. My voice was calm. This wasn't anger. It was clinical. They disowned me at midnight. As of 12:01 a. They are a hostile entity. I need to know every dollar, every contract, and every point of exposure. Find everything. Act accordingly. The call comes 2 days later. My lawyer's voice is tight. Professional. Eliza. We found something. It's not just the money you've been sending them. It's much worse. She explains. My brother Ryan, in a desperate bid to launch a new digital imprint to impress my father, had been illegally using Quantum Read's proprietary predictive algorithms to scout authors. That was theft of intellectual property. That was bad. But this was the kill shot. To secure a $5 million bank loan for this new venture, my lawyer continued, her voice flat. Ryan forged your signature. He listed $50 million of your personal pre-IPO Quantum Read shares as collateral for the loan. I was silent. The air left my lungs. Eliza, are you there? I finally took a breath. He pledged my shares. Yes. The bank accepted the forged signature and funded the loan 3 months ago. The funds are already gone. Spent? They hadn't just disowned me. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had committed federal fraud. My brother had leveraged my entire life's work, the company I built with my bare hands, while he was collecting a salary from our father, and he had gambled it away. What happens now? I asked. Now, my lawyer said, we notify the bank of the fraud. The bank, when notified of federal fraud, did not hesitate. They didn't just freeze the accounts, they called the $5 million loan. Immediately. Hayes & Sons Publishing was given 48 hours to repay the full amount. Or the bank would begin liquidation proceedings. Starting with the historic Beacon Hill brownstone, the legacy was collapsing. I knew this because my parents, Arthur and Susan, flew cross-country and showed up, unannounced, at my office in San Francisco. My assistant, a formidable woman named Jess, buzzed me. Eliza. There are 2 people in the lobby, and Arthur and Susan Hayes. They do not have an appointment. I know, I said. Let them wait. I had them wait in our glass and steel lobby, surrounded by monitors streaming global data, for 32 minutes. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because I was in a meeting about our Series D funding round. A meeting that was infinitely more important than their panic. When I finally came down, they looked so small against the 20-foot-tall video wall. My father, his face gray and crumpled, rushed over. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, sputtering terror. Eliza, you have to call them off. You have to call the bank. The lawyers. All of them. I just stood there, my hands in the pockets of my blazer. They're using words like fraud. Eliza, fraud. Do you understand what that means? You'll destroy the family name. You'll send your brother. You'll send Ryan to jail. I was about to answer when my mother, Susan, rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Her hands were shaking. Eliza, please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He's your brother. This is your father. Please. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how he gets. I looked at her. At this woman who had spent 35 years teaching me that peace meant silence. And the final piece of my old life just broke. Peace, I said. My voice quiet. But it cut through the noise of the lobby. You were keeping the peace. I looked her right in the eye. I was raised to believe that a wife supports her husband's decisions, that contradicting him publicly would undermine his authority. I was taught that the highest virtue a woman in our family could have was to be a peacemaker, to smooth over the conflicts rather than address them directly. But that silence, your silence, it came at my expense. Your peace was my silence. You stood by and watched him break me for 20 years. You stood by while he refused me $20,000. And you're standing here now while your son has stolen $50 million. That's not peace. Mom, that's complicity. She recoiled, her hand dropping from my arm as if she'd been burned. My father stared at me, his mind unable to process this new reality. The legacy, he stammered. The family. Ryan. He made a mistake. A mistake, I said. I took a step toward him. The power had finally, completely, shifted. He wasn't the patriarch in his dark, wood-paneled study anymore. He was just a terrified old man in my lobby. A mistake is a typo in a manuscript. Dad, what Ryan did was commit a felony. He forged my name on a federal document and gambled with my life's work. And you? You created the monster that told him he was entitled to it. You have to fix this. Eliza. He whispered. You're right. I said. I will. I turned back to my mother, who was sobbing. You will leave. I looked at my father. You will fly back to Boston. You will not contact me again. My lawyers will contact you with the terms of the settlement. We're done here. The legacy? He said one last time, his voice a ghost. I looked at him, my voice cold and final. The legacy you destroyed, that the moment you signed your name to that text message. My brother just put the nail in the coffin. Goodbye. Dad. I turned and walked back toward the elevators. And I didn't look back. The resolution was cold, fast, and professional. I didn't send Ryan to jail. I didn't need to. Putting him in a cell would have been an emotional act. A flash of anger. This was a corporate takedown. My legal team drafted a settlement. It was simple. To avoid federal prosecution for fraud, my father and brothers would sign over their entire 80% stake in Hayes & Sons Publishing to me. Effective immediately. This transfer would cover the $5 million fraudulent loan and a tiny fraction of the stolen intellectual property and the 10 years of investments I had made. They signed. Of course they signed. Their legacy, their pride, their entire identity. It was all worthless when faced with actual consequences. I held ownership of Hayes & Sons for exactly 1 week, long enough for my audit team to secure the archives. Then, I sold the entire company, its name, its and its dwindling assets, to a larger conglomerate that specialized in absorbing failed publishing houses. They dissolved the Hayes & Sons name 2 days later. The legacy my father had sacrificed his daughter for was gone, erased from the world with a press release. The historic Boston brownstone, the one that smelled of old paper and judgment, was sold at auction to pay the remaining corporate debts. I did one last thing. I set up a small, anonymous trust for my mother's retirement. Enough for a comfortable, quiet life. It was handled through a law firm. She will never know it came from me. I never spoke to my father. Or my brothers? Ever again. The night the final wire transfer hit my account, confirming the sale, I opened my laptop. I found the old spreadsheet I had kept for a decade. The one I had titled, foolishly, Family. The one where I tracked every dollar I had sent them. Every loan. Every gift. Every time I had propped up their failing world. I stared at the numbers. At the long list of dates that represented so many years of hoping to be seen. Then, I selected the file, and I clicked delete. That night, for the first time in my entire adult life, I slept through till morning. No guilt, no noise, just peace. If you are watching this, and you have ever felt like you were on the fringes of your own family, I see you. Remember, your worth is not defined by their limited perception of you. The hardest, and most important, thing you will ever do is choose to build your own legacy. And sometimes that means having the courage to walk away from the one you were born into. Have you ever had to make that choice? Please share your story in the comments below. Thank you for listening.